Hello and welcome to News Now. Thanks for stopping by. Tonight, we get a house call from a local doctor who's going to help us get back on track with our New Year's resolutions. And you'll meet a local podcaster who has gotten himself in the middle of one of the biggest controversies on YouTube. But first, we begin with a fresh look at the Michigan State Police investigation into the breathalyzer system. Joining us now is Lieutenant Mike Shaw of the MSP. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's just go back to the beginning on this case because we've been seeing and hearing so much. How did the Michigan State Police first find out that there was a problem?
So what we wanted to do is our data masters were underneath our breath alcohol unit, weren't part of our forensic laboratory, and it was decided that we wanted to bring them in there and get accredited. So we hired a technical leader to start to take a look at how we do things, where we're going from here. It's about an 18-month process to actually get that changeover. As that technical leader was starting to go through paperwork, they started to notice some things that just weren't quite right. So we asked some paperwork from the person that we had contracted to come in here and test our machines. And during that process, we noticed that some of the paperwork was actually criminal in nature, to where they were forging the documents. And then other parts of it was just they were missing a lot of deadlines for us. I don't know if people are very familiar with these data master machines, but every week there's a test that's done internally by the machine every Monday at 4 o'clock in the morning, unless somebody's actually got a test going at that time. And then every 120 days there's another certification that's done by these people that we contracted to come in there. And that's basically to take a look at the machine, little things like dust it off. I'm sure that people have been in a lockup or in a police station realize, it gets kind of dirty in there back where these machines are, all the way up to if they need to be recalibrated.
So this is not the thing we see on the side of the road with the breathalyzer. This is once you get to the station, there's a more professional machine, a better machine, and that's what we're talking about. And these contractors are supposed to come in and make sure they're working right, basically, right?
Absolutely. So their responsibility is to come in at that 120-day mark, perform any maintenance that needs to be done, dust them off, run some tests through there, make sure that they're all good to go. That's part of the administrative rules that we wrote as part of the drunk driving law that the legislature approved. So that's something that has to be done. So most police officers, or even if you watch court TV or anything like that, one of the things in Michigan that most defense attorneys are going to ask you for are these logs, and these logs are going to say that those tests are performed every week, and then there's a stamp being done every 120 days. Which
gets us really to the point of who is doing this and what is their motivation to do it correctly. And in this case, was it just they didn't want to do their job? They were lazy? There doesn't seem to be like a reason you'd want to go do that, right? To mess with these logs?
And that was the weird part for us is, what was the motive behind it? Now, some of it is criminal, so I can't really get into some of the facts behind it. But, Colonel Gasper said it to both houses in the legislature. It appears some of it was just laziness, that they didn't want to go out to the individual police departments where these were housed to do the job that they were getting paid to do.
So I got to believe that you guys are going to put some other system in place to make sure that it's getting checked correctly, right?
So once we kind of found this and really did some checking into it, we went to the extreme notion to take all 203 of them out of service. Because what we wanted to do is we wanted to have a member of MSP to go out there and take a look at them and re-inspect them, make sure that 120-day date was accurate. So that way, from this point on, anybody knows that that machine has been touched by an MSP member, that it's been re-inspected, that it works the way that it's supposed to do. And that's how we're going to do it now in the future, is that we won't contract anymore. This is going to be done in-house through our forensic science laboratories.
And so the idea that you guys are doing the investigation, it bothers some defense attorneys who say, why would you guys be doing that investigation? So why would you guys do it?
So there's kind of two parts to that question. So if we're talking about the criminal investigation, who better? I mean, there's nobody better to do it than MSP. There's nobody that has the investigators, the talent, so that takes that part out of it. As far as the actual going through the 120-day checks, as of today, we are finished with that portion of it. That technical leader has gone through, has not identified any more of the instruments that need to be redone or brought up any other cases. And now what we're going to do is we're going to bring somebody from outside the department that's an expert in press data testing have them re-go through all those logs again, go through everything to make sure that everything that was found by our technical leader matches what they find as well. So there is going to be an independent portion of that part, but the criminal investigation is going to be ours, turned over to the Attorney General's office when that's finished.
So as of right now, you're still asking people not to use the machines, but to get a blood draw. Is that impacting law enforcement?
So we're about halfway through, more than halfway through already of those machines, and as we go through and recertify them, we're informing the locals those machines are up and running, ready to go and good to go for it. Some local departments don't use the data master. They're firm believers in blood tests. I don't know if people realize it, but when you get your driver's license, you actually sign a form saying that you either give blood, breath, or urine to a police officer if you're suspected for drunk driving. So some departments just use blood automatically. Some use a combination of both. And quite honestly, in my 25 years, I've never seen anybody take a urine test, but that is a possibility.
Defense attorneys say all of the cases involving these machines should be thrown out. I'm guessing that's not likely to happen, but there are 50 or some cases that could happen, or new trials or something.
So the prosecutor will look at all 56 of those cases and decide what's in there, because there's a lot more to it than that. While the data master is a great part of putting together a case against somebody for drunk driving, there's a lot of other parts to it as well, be it driving down the roadway, doing field sobriety tests, all kinds of stuff. So it's up to that individual prosecutor. They may just take the data master out of it and say, we're going to go ahead anyways because I got enough other evidence to show that person was drunk driving. So no, we're not going to throw out every one of them. We haven't recommended that to anybody. That's going to be up to those individual prosecutors to decide if they have a good case or not.
All right, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. All right, we'll be right back with more on News Now. Welcome back to News Now. The Michigan State Police have a big problem. The people who are supposed to keep the breathalyzer machines that test suspected drunk drivers may have been fudging the numbers and the reports that are used to get convictions. A fraud investigation is underway that could lead to criminal charges. And 200 of the breathalyzer machines in question are being pulled to be tested. Police are being told to take suspected drunk drivers to the hospital to have their blood drawn, as the machines are currently unreliable. Here to get into this is criminal defense attorney Neil ROCKInd. It looks like we have some contractors who are supposed to test these breathalyzer machines not doing their job, or maybe even worse, maybe faking the numbers. What do we know so far?
So what we know is that in Michigan, in order for a breath test to be admitted in court, somebody has to verify, a particular person has to verify and calibrate that machine every 120 days. The law is that if it's not calibrated every 120 days, then the machine has to be taken out of service and the test can't be admissible. So what we have is the people who have to literally come out and test it have to sign what is essentially an under oath declaration that they have tested and calibrated that machine and it's working. And there are serious questions and even allegations that the people who were supposed to do those calibrations lied, committed fraud, or misrepresented whether they did it or when they did it.
Who are these people that do this? How do you have any idea? I mean, if they're actually doing it, what do they do when they show up? Do they have them shipped to them? Do they go check them out? How do you know that? How would you know that they're doing? Who's checking on them?
Who's policing the contractors of the police? Well, according to the state police, the police. So essentially, each breathalyzer, which is in a particular police department, is located usually in a room, in a data master or breath test room. And these guys, and there were only 3 of them for this company that had I think it was like a $1.5 million contract with the state police. They divided the state into three sectors. And one person was responsible for the East Coast, one for the West Coast, and one for the North. And they're supposed to come in and they're supposed to verify and actually go out to the local police department and check. So someone is supposed to see them walk in and walk out. But right now, all it is we have to take their word for it. And the problem is that their word is from what we've discovered, is not very good.
So what's new today in this is that you guys are saying the Michigan State Police should not be the agency investigating this. You want an independent investigation.
Yes. I don't think, and for reasons that are so obvious, they shouldn't have to be stated by you, I, or anybody else. But the idea that one agency can conduct its own investigation of its own people, I mean, the conflict of interest, it screams of conflict of interest. So I know, for example, that if I walk into and the importance of the testing, so that if I walk into a scale in my bathroom, and I want to know whether or not I've gained a pound or lost a pound, I have to rely on the accuracy of that scale. And in this case, we're dealing with things that are far more important than whether or not I've gained a pound or lost a pound. Whether someone is below, at, or above the legal limit is critical in an allegation of drunk driving. And the problem is that the Michigan State Police wants to tell us that they can police themselves. They want to say that they can look into this themselves. They'll police their own contractors. And the problem is that I don't know why we should have to accept, in fact, I'll say that we shouldn't have to accept any finding by the Michigan State Police when they're just investigating themselves. We always want an outside agency. There's never a circumstance in life where we allow one body to investigate itself and we say, oh, that's it. You're all done. It's good. We're happy. We want someone else outside to look at it. Special counsel, independent counsel. Heck, I'll do it. They can appoint Neil ROCKIND to investigate. They can appoint one-man grand juries. In the city of Flint, in other investigations, we've appointed people. We've had special prosecutors. We need somebody to come in and investigate this separately.
So I think they've said that they've identified already 50-some cases that are in question. What happens to those cases? Your phone must be ringing off the hook. I mean, do they got to throw those cases out? What do you do?
Okay, well, so first of all, let's take the first thing. That's nonsense. What we're dealing with is if there's a case in which one of those representatives, who's just a contractor, not a police officer, they're just a contractor, hired by this company, hired by the state police to go out and test these devices, if one time one of these guys made a false representation in documents in court, I would suggest that none of us are obligated to accept that any other representation they made is reliable. So the idea that, well, they lied on a couple occasions and we'll throw out those 20, 30, or 40 breath tests, but we'll accept all the rest, I think is nonsense. If they lied once, then we should be able to look at the reliability of their other declarations under oath. Why should we take their word for it now?
How does the law work? Would they have to go back and get new trials, or do you think, are you calling for a total dismissal of all cases since they've known about this problem?
I think those are both possibilities. Yes, our phone, the phones of my peers have been ringing off the hook. We've got people who want to have their cases reopened, re-examined. Not every case is going to be capable of being re-looked at, but there are some cases that should be re-looked at. And I'll tell you, prosecutors who knew or who were on notice, or even the state police who was on notice that there was a problem as far back as August of 2019, they ought to reopen all of their cases. They ought to allow defendants and defense lawyers the choice if we want to reopen those cases and re-examine them. We should not be left to accept their word or their solution. We should have our own just solution in court.
Should people be fired? Should people go to jail?
If they're found to have made misrepresentations that maybe ended up costing people convictions, license sanctions, and maybe even jail and the consequences of jail, then yeah, then they should be jailed themselves and they should be fired minimally.
All right, will you come back and follow up on this as this continues?
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, Neil ROCKIND. We appreciate your time. We want you to be a part of this show, so we want you to call us at the number below and give us your take on all that's going on that we talked about today, and we'll be sharing your feedback on tomorrow's show. Welcome back to News Now. Joining us now is Dr. Tom RIFAI from Reality Meets Science. Thanks for being here.
Wonderful to be with you, Kevin.
So we are at the end of January, basically, and people have been doing their New Year's resolutions, and some are probably still at it, and some have probably lost sight. We want to try and get people back on track. So we want to talk a little bit about eating and exercise and sort of getting motivated to get back at it as February comes. The months it's gonna get dark and cold, and there's really no reason for us not to take care of ourselves.
Absolutely, yes. And I am a modest supporter of New Year's resolutions. As you might imagine, making a lifestyle resolution is, I think, the route to go ultimately. But there are times of the year, even days of the week, you could argue Monday has a better odd of success in helping people kickstart something. So if you want to make the most of the resolution and you feel like it's petering out, and you kind of want to have the guys, what is that game? Curling, right? Where they and you want someone to
right,
lower that friction, make it go as far as possible. Look towards a motivation first that is really central to your core beliefs and that makes it obvious why you want to be healthy and keep your mind and body intact. We call it finding your why. I don't think that I've necessarily originated that concept, but I feel it is very important when I speak with clients or patients to identify why are you really doing this. Not a blood sugar or blood pressure number or somebody scared you with having a heart bypass or whatever, and insulin shots, but why do you really want to do this? Sometimes it's very straightforward. I've heard all kinds of whys at almost 52 with, as you know, I have a 2 and a 4-year-old. Mine's pretty straightforward and classic. I see those faces and it's really helps give me a wonderful kind of compassionate accountability. But I've heard a wide-ranging number of whys, from the need to stay physically active to engage in very isolated backpacking and kayaking trips that were so rejuvenating to one of my clients, that with the pain that he was going through, he just couldn't imagine living without them, and so it was unacceptable. So getting back to that and being able to stay and not risk that experience was his why. I've even heard, I want to stay sexually active till I'm 90. Now, I'm not going to judge anyone's why. I said, that's fine. That's usually a vascular issue, and that's your why. So that's one thing, first and foremost, is to look beyond necessarily a weight goal and something that's external to something internal.
One thing that I see is, January gets here, January 1, and then everybody's all in. They're gonna diet and they're gonna exercise, and all of a sudden, they're sore and it hurts, and they try to do too much. Can't you, if you're going for a long time lifestyle change anyway, should you just start slowly and how much do you need to do? Can you get there by starting with a walk before you run?
100% yes, and this is a phenomenal question that must be individualized. So what you're describing is really a willpower burnout, when you try to do too much at once. Now, there are some people, and there's really good evidence, that for people who are highly motivated and they're in a very structured program and they're looking for that type of a result, and usually it is part of a structured program. I'm not saying on your own, but those that, for instance, lose a lot of weight quickly, again, in a structured, professionally guided program, tend to retain more weight loss in the long run than people who lose slowly. But there are different levels of readiness in the world, and not everyone's ready to go into an intensive lifestyle intervention, so that's a select group of people. If you have some level of readiness, but you don't want to necessarily attack all 5 keys to optimal wellness, 100% set goals that you think can give you a confidence level of achieving that's at least a 7 on a scale from 1 to 10. If you are going to try to achieve a certain health goal, we would argue that a confidence level of 7 to 8 on 1 to 10, where 1 is very low confidence, 10 is high, is just right, based on some good evidence. 1 or 2 below 7 is obviously you're putting too much on yourself. Being too confident is like, hey, let's nudge a little bit. I mean, and then be willing to accept that your plan may work, it may not work, and it may work partially, and that's all success, because even if it didn't work, you know what doesn't work. But if you've got a central why as to why you're doing it, that usually will allow you to have the self-forgiveness, which is a big part of it, right? We are so hard on ourselves. We're so binary. We're going to completely cut out this or that. We regularly talk about in coaching right from the get-go, what are your non-negotiables? What's your, there's something we call the 5% fun zone. I'll give you an example. One of my former patients, he's now out maintaining a 100-pound loss for about 4 years, had told me that which of the 5 keys was most effective for him, and we have one called Mind Matters, and what about it? The non-negotiable discussion, he said it was a national coney dog. And then he said, Doc, you didn't beat me over the head with a stick about it. I said, well, no, why would I start negotiating what you just said was your non-negotiable? He said, I haven't had one in 4 years because of that. I said, how would that happen? He said, well, I just kept saying next week. Well, maybe next week. But if you told me I couldn't have it, I would have been there within a week. I would have had 10 of them. I would have come back and not told you about it. And why isn't my blood pressure and weight coming under control, Doc? So I think we have to have some forgiveness in the process too.
So do you probably don't think a cheat day is a good idea as much as trying to do it right, and then if you make a mistake, saying that's okay, you make mistakes, let's get back on the horse, or is it different than either of those?
No, it's actually it's somewhat correct, but we don't use the term cheat day because in a sense what we call the 5% fun zone is when you have something planned out, and we really ask you to enjoy it. We don't necessarily say have a temptation sitting around you in a big pile of brownies. I would inhale them myself, but if you're going to have one, truly enjoy it, but that's a planned a deviation from the norm. If you have a slip, on the other hand, again, forgiveness. It just stands slip for stop, look, investigate, plan, and then rinse and repeat. And that plan may work to help mitigate what happened that you did unintentionally. But there's no reason to beat yourself up or even consider it a cheat day if you're having something that's a planned indulgence. We've never seen anyone achieve true optimal wellness after severely poor health that has had to have zero tolerance to anything. Almost everyone who succeeds finds that they have their non-negotiables. They just budget them correctly, and they try to avoid being tempted by them too often, but nor do they sorry, English teacher, enjoy them when they do have them.
All right, thanks for being here. And that's something good to remember that you mentioned is don't tempt yourself with having everything around. Try and protect yourself by just having good foods around you, and you're more likely to succeed. All right, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next time.